this video, I will be reading from the work of Miles Mathis in his article titled The Hidden Kings, Camelot Ruled from the Cave of Merlin. First draft written December 2007, first appeared on the internet 2008. As you see, this paper was written several years ago. I have been sitting on it for over 7 years, but now, after publishing many other papers in the same line on faked events, this one may be somewhat easier to promote. If the thesis is too far out for you at a first glance, read the other papers first. I especially recommend my paper on the Lincoln assassination, which has many parallels to this one. I also recommend my very long paper on the Tate-Manson event. The photographic evidence I compiled for that one exceeds even the photographic evidence here, which is extensive. As usual, I offer this paper as an opinion piece, protected as free speech by the Constitution. It is my professional reading of the evidence to be taken as such. When I say professional, I mean I have shown previous expertise in reading and de-spinning photographic evidence. As a professional realist artist, I have honed my eye over several decades. Part of my job has long included working from photographs, which I take myself. To turn these photos into portraits, I have to be able to read all the subtle shades and lines contained in the image. So I have been accustomed to look more closely at the world, real and imagined, than most people. I see things most people don't. You can understand how that skill would be useful in unscrambling the false history we have been sold. In the last decade, a few people have awoken from their slumbers, cued by the lies surrounding 9/11, Aurora, and Sandy Hook. They have learned to see through the bedtime stories they have been told. With this suspension of disbelief destroyed, they are now ready to reconsider the other stories of recent history. In this paper, we will look at the Kennedy fairy tale. We will start by studying the assassination of JFK. But by the end, we will see that all the stories about all the Kennedys are false, going all the way back to 1944. It has long been clear to almost all intelligent people who study the evidence that the Warren Commission was a cover-up. Something like 80% of those polled admit they don't believe the Warren Commission report, and we must assume that the other 20% are very gullible. Some have also studied the so-called conspiracy theories, the alternate theories that is. But it should be equally clear that the alternate theories are, in most ways, just as full of holes and just as poorly constructed as the standard theory. Like the Warren Commission report, the alternate theories also read like propaganda. The style of all counter-stories, in whatever form, has been just as fishy as the Warren Commission story. To those of us trained to look at form as well as content, the counter-stories also read like a script, or like a transparent effort at mind control. Let me suggest to you that both sets of stories were created mainly as misdirection and disinformation. This is not to say that all alternate theorists are controlled by the government or by anyone else. It is only to suggest that alternate theories, in all forms but one, seem to be encouraged by the government and the powers that be. We have always assumed that alternate theories would be frowned upon or discouraged, and yet we have never seen much real effort at suppression. In fact, in most cases, the dissemination of alternate theories would seem to be abetted by the mainstream, not suppressed. You should ask yourself if the alternate theories and theorists might be selling you the main lines of the desired story just as fully as the standard theory. For the powers that be, it may not matter whether you believe there was one shooter or many, or even whether you believe that the CIA or FBI was involved. The only thing that is critical is that you believe Kennedy was assassinated that day, and the alternate theories sell that fact with even more emphasis and gusto than the Warren Commission. As it turns out, the alternate theories make a much greater hero out of Kennedy than the standard theory, and it may be that this is a welcome side effect to the real conspirators. The first desire of those controlling both stories is that you, the public, be kept monumentally confused so that you can never ask the proper questions. This end is achieved by having some competing theories. In this way, the Warren Commission was only the official fake story, but the other fake stories are just as important in the long-running effort to make it seem that there is no right answer. The storytellers are quite satisfied to have an ever-growing mass of speculation and opinion, which almost inevitably must overwhelm all investigators. The more diversions that are created, the less likely it is that anyone will discover the real clues. As an example of how alternate theories have been disseminated by the government itself, I send you to a recent paper of mine on Ramparts magazine. Ramparts was one of the first to publish alternative theories of the assassination beginning in the late 1960s. Although Ramparts was considered to be a far-left or even anarchist rag at the time, it turns out it was another CIA front, like Encounter, Partisan Review, Paris Review, and most other intellectual magazines. By the 1960s, the CIA had infiltrated the entire media, including smaller, seemingly independent journals like Ramparts. The CIA was even good enough to admit this during the Senate Church Committee hearings in the 1970s.
I thought that it was a matter of real concern that planted stories intended to serve a national purpose abroad came home and were circulated here and believed here, because this would mean that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States by channeling it through some foreign country. Now we're looking at that very carefully.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
At CBS, we had been contacted by the CIA. As a matter of fact, by the time I became the head of the whole news and public affairs operation in 1954, ships had been established, and I was told about them and asked if I'd carry on with them.
We have quite a lot of detailed information, and we will evaluate it, and we will include any evidence of wrongdoing or any evidence of impropriety in our final report and make recommendations.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to the national news services, AP and UPI?
Well, again, I think we're getting into the kind of detail, Mr. Chairman, that I'd prefer to handle in executive session.
Senator, do you think that you named the news organizations in your final report?
That remains to be decided.
I think it was entirely in order for our correspondents at that time to make use of CIA agent chiefs of station and other members of the executive staff of CIA as sources of information which were useful in their assessments of world conditions.
Would you say that continues today?
Well, I would think probably for a reporter it would continue today, but because of all of the revelations of the period of the 1970s, it seems to me that a reporter's got to be much more circumspect in doing it now, or he runs the risk of at least being looked at with considerable disfavor by the public. I think you've got to be much more careful about it.
And you can read about it in my papers on the Cultural Cold War. You may also consult the books of Francis Stoner Saunders. In this paper, I will tell you what really happened that day, and what was really happened since 1944. The JFK mystery is just one part of a much larger mystery, a mystery I will unravel for you in the second half of this paper. The JFK assassination is the key that unlocks more than a half a century of closed doors, allowing us to see behind the greatest curtain of all. The problem from the beginning is that you have been given theories before you looked at the facts yourself. I will turn that on its head, giving you the facts before I tell you the whole story. You will have already built your own theory, most likely before I even begin collating. I will present to you the most critical facts and clues and photos and other evidence without at first looking at them as part of one theory or another. As Sherlock Holmes told us, it is dangerous to have a theory before you have the facts. And up to now, we have had two possible theories. Either Kennedy was killed by Oswald, or he was killed by someone else. I will show you that the facts, taken alone, point to neither of these two conclusions. Those who have done any investigation at all know the many arguments against the standard theory. But let us now look critically at the alternate theories, not as apologists for the standard theory, but simply as a rational people. The alternate theories tell us that everything we have been told is a lie. Then they begin building an argument by stating that Kennedy had many enemies. The main difference between different theories concerns which enemy actually got him. We are told that these enemies included Johnson, the CIA, the FBI, Hoover, the Secret Service, Texas oilmen, Castro, the Russians, the bankers, and the mob. That's a lot of very powerful enemies. Every alternate theory, without exception, accepts that Kennedy had made a lot of very powerful enemies. Some theories may downplay some of the players above and play up others, but all theories begin with the idea that Kennedy was surrounded by enemies. Now, I don't need to argue against that list or any part of it. I could try to pick it apart by showing that although Kennedy had made enemies in the CIA, for instance, he had control of another part of it, and that this part was also powerful, completely capable of gathering information. I could show you that his brother, the Attorney General, was very powerful and had some very powerful friends in the DOJ and elsewhere. I could remind you that Joseph Kennedy, his father, had mob connections, to say the least, and that John also had direct connections. I could remind you of Frank Sinatra and Sam Giancana, for instance, who are known to have helped deliver the 1960 elections, and so on. But I don't need to do that. I can accept that Kennedy was surrounded by powerful enemies. I can accept the entire list above. In fact, the bigger and scarier the list, the better I like it. For it leads me to my first question to you. Number 1. If Kennedy was surrounded by such a pack of jackals hungry for his blood, why would he go onto their turf, ride through it in broad daylight in an open car, among uncontrolled tall buildings? Why would he do it without stopping normal traffic in downtown Dallas? There was normal traffic going the opposite direction on the Commerce. You can see the cars in the background of the Zapruder film. The windows in the car were even rolled all the way down. Although they had bulletproof glass in 1963, and we must assume the car was equipped with it, look closely at the photographs of that day and you will see that the window on the other side is partly up, providing some protection for the ladies on that side, but on JFK's side, the window is all the way down. Also, according to Zapruder and other documents and films, people were allowed to line the street only a few feet from the motorcade. We can see it in these photographs that more than one person actually stepped off the curb and ran into the street, uncontested by police. One lady claims to have stepped within an arm's length of the motorcade shouting, "Look over here for a picture." We know this is true from other evidence, such as the Daniels film taken of the car emerging from the far side of the bridge, where the two little boys are waving. The car passes only a few feet from the boys and the movie camera. I show further proof of it below, where I analyze photos from Bell and others. Those alternate theorists who point out how odd it is for the Secret Service to have been pulled off the back of the car and for the building windows to be open don't mention that it is even odder for the route to have been so completely uncontested. They imply, by omission, that it was normal in 1963 to have ladies with cameras stepping out into the street and men with movie cameras milling around on the grass and hundreds of day trippers rubbernecking in whatever fashion suited them with absolutely no effort at crowd control, but it wasn't. Compare the visits to Miami or Chicago weeks earlier and you will see that this protocol wasn't normal at all. Not in 1963 or 1863. Common sense would tell you that you don't allow strangers that close to the president under any circumstances. It has nothing to do with the 60s being a more innocent time or any of that misdirection. Truman would not have been caught in that situation, or Wilson, or anyone else, much less a president like Kennedy. supposedly surrounded by a combination of enemies unparalleled in history. People then try to blame his Secret Service, but Kennedy had eyes. Even if it is true that he could not have known about the open windows on the book depository until he got there, the other factors were clear to anyone who was awake. He didn't need to be briefed or to rely on intelligence reports from good guys or bad guys. All he needed to do is look around. Whoever was riding in that motorcade could see that the public was lining the streets, that traffic was uncontrolled, that the car had no protection, and so on. Even if they lied to him about the route, he could see with his own eyes that he was a sitting duck. Do you think a man with so many enemies would be smiling and waving to the crowd, supposing he was ever stupid enough to get caught in that position? No, he would be hiding under the seat, ordering the driver to get him out of there as fast as possible. In response to this question, people tell me that Kennedy was naive, and he was an egomaniac, that he was controlled, and so on. But who is naive here? Do these responses even begin to answer my question in a meaningful way? No, they are just more propaganda, put forward to keep us from looking at what happened without a preset explanation. An egomaniac would be the last person to be caught in that situation, since he values his own life so much. He would not give his life away just to enjoy a few cheers. We know that Kennedy was not stupid. He was also not naive. In that famous speech that the alternate theorists love to play,
the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be.
Kennedy warns us of the secret government and asks us for our help. Does the same man who gave that speech allow himself to be put into an open car in an uncontrolled major city with a bullseye on his head? Of course not. One of the most influential alternate theory films after Oliver Stone's JFK is a multi-part documentary first aired on the History Channel called The Men Who Killed Kennedy. Notice that we have a mainstream channel selling the conspiracy theory, and that this documentary somehow obtained access to a lot of obscure FBI evidence. Also note that the History Channel is a known intelligence front created specifically to propagandize its viewers. I have no intention of critiquing this film point for point or even as a whole. I only want to point out to you one scene from it. In Miami, the FBI had infiltrated plans for an assassination attempt similar to Dallas, we are told. Plotters were captured on audio tape, and in the film the agents themselves even show how they planted the recording devices and in which house. Then we listen to the tape from October 1963. The key moment is when the bad guy asks the spy, "Do you know how many body doubles the president has here?" Most people don't pause on that, but it made my head turn. The man does not ask if there are body doubles, but how many? Of course, the president travels with body doubles. The alternate theorists now push that idea with Saddam Hussein, since according to many of them, Hussein is not dead. In fact, I think it is very likely that Hussein is not dead. The film of Hussein's death looked fake. It was fishy in too many ways. But few remember that Kennedy would be expected to have body doubles too, just like Hussein. If Kennedy did decide that the motorcade should go on, simply as a PR move to get votes for the election of 1964, then he would certainly have nominated one of his body doubles to take the ride. Critics of my theory will say that people could tell the difference, but people are not as good as they think at recognizing small differences in the human face. In fact, without verbal clues, clothing clues, and familiar gestures, people are actually terrible at differentiating between people who look similar. Just recently, Conan O'Brien proved this on his late-night show by sending a body double that resembled him only distantly out into the streets to talk to people. No one recognized that it was not him, although he is 6'4" and the body double was under 6 foot. The double was way off in many other ways, the only similarity being the red hair. The voice was also completely different, and Conan is famous for his talk show. Afterwards, the audience pretended to be astonished that people could be so blind and deaf. But this is quite normal. In my experience, most people are blind to all but the most obvious differences, and the only reason they don't make more mistakes than they do is that they generally relate to a small group of familiar people and do so with the help of voice, gesture, and clothing recognition. But I should state that even more strongly. As we will see below, people are not good at seeing any clues, no matter how obvious, much less subtle facial differences. As the premier example, see my analysis of the Bobby Kennedy pics below, in which photographs used on the front pages of major newspapers have glaring paste-up problems, and no one has seen them in 40 years. This is all to say that a large majority of people are fabulously easy to fool regarding body doubles or anything else. Those who might be able to differentiate are pushed by context into refusing to ask the question. Almost no one is going to question if the man in the car is Kennedy, since subconsciously they think, who else is going to be in the car? Almost no one was close enough to make a positive ID, and those who were would not be asking themselves the question. Others in the motorcade could also be fooled with very little effort. Simply let them see the real Kennedy waiting to get in the car, make the switch at the last moment, in the dark of a parking garage or something, and then drive on. He is front, so all they can see is the back of his head. Anyone who gets a clue can be paid off or coerced. But even coercion would be unnecessary, since those in the motorcade are either friends or enemies. You don't care what your enemies think. You are using the body double to fool them, and your friends are not going to say anything anyway. They will understand the need for the body double, won't they? If they have to lie afterwards, so what? They are politicians. They lie for a living. In what is considered to be one of the most unusual theories concerning JFK, a researcher named Robert Morningstar has offered the idea that Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit was used as a body double for the president. If you will remember, Tippit was said to have been killed by Oswald as he fled downtown Dallas. Strictly, Morningstar would have Tippit used as a corpse double, but the idea is much the same. Tippit was known among the Dallas police as something of a Kennedy look-alike. Additionally, Tippit's head wound was similar to the head wound decided on for Kennedy by the Warren Commission. Both very suggestive, as I think you will agree. However, on closer examination, Morningstar's arguments begin to fall apart. A large part of his argument centers on moles, but features larger and easier to see than moles kill his visual proof. The most famous corpse photo is Robert Grodin's leaked photo from Bethesda. Morningstar publishes this photo right next to a photo of Tippit's corpse. I was able to spot the problem immediately, which is the septum of the nose, that is, the division between the nostrils. We are looking up at both heads, and the two septums are prominent. Tippit's nose is extraordinary for its very narrow septum. The Kennedy corpse, whoever it is, has a wide septum. It is not Tippit. No, Morningstar's theory is more misdirection. It is possible that it is official disinformation, or it may only be a lucky near hit from an outsider, allowed to thrive precisely because it is wrong. Either way, it is suggestive and remains so, even after it has been shown to fail. Even if it is purposeful misdirection, it can be turned, since it contains a grain of truth. For, although the Kennedy corpse in Bethesda is not Tippit, it is not Kennedy either, as I will show. That said, it is possible that Tippit was used as Kennedy's double in a different part of the story. Tippit may have been used as an extra corpse double in Dallas, but he was not the corpse double in Bethesda, as you will see. As I was studying Morningstar's images of Kennedy and Tippit, as well as returning to the archives to look at all the famous pictures of Kennedy there, several very distinguishing characteristics jumped out at me. Moles can be covered up or penciled in, but other things are not as easy to cover or fake. In the Bethesda death photos, we cannot see everything clearly, but there are some things we can see clearly. We can see the upper teeth, we can see the forehead, we can see the septum and the shape of the underside of the nose, and things of that nature. So the logical thing to do is to take what we have, rather than try to compare things we may not have. We know the wounds have been manipulated, since even if they were not manipulated for sinister purposes, they would have been manipulated for medical ones. The doctors may have initially tried to close them to stop loss of blood, for instance, for any number of other possible valid reasons. So it is best to look at areas that could not and would not be manipulated. The forehead is a good place to start, since a large part of it is pristine. We have the wound well above the right eye, near the hairline, and the right eyebrow has been shaved. It is true that Kennedy had a weaker eyebrow on that side, but it was weak on the outside, not the inside. We can see the inside of the eyebrow here clearly, and there is nothing there. That is very curious. The normal commentary on this photo is to point out that the wound does not match the huge hole of the Zapruder film, and I agree with that commentary. I am not here to contradict the given commentary in this section, but to add to it. I agree that the wound is fishy, but I think other things are even more fishy. To begin with, why is the eyebrow shaved but not the hairline? Shaving the eyebrow is a pre-op procedure, but there would have been no reason to operate on a wound of that sort. First of all, the man was already dead. Second of all, if the first doctors in Dallas were going to operate post-mortem out of some wild hope for a miracle or to cover their asses, as some of the doctors have claimed, then they would have shaved both the eyebrow and the hair on top of the head. At the very least, they would have shaved the area around the wound. And we don't see that. Hair much nearer to the wound than the eyebrow is in place. So why was the eyebrow shaved? I suggest to you that the eyebrow was shaved simply because it didn't look like Kennedy's. Eyebrow arch and thickness is very distinctive, and it would be one of the first things anyone would go to for a likeness. The eyebrow of this guy didn't match Kennedy, so they shaved it. It is that simple. From the side view, the shape of the eyebrow can't really be determined. All we can see from both photos is that the left eyebrow has not been shaved. We cannot determine much else about it, but an intact right eyebrow in the first photo would be one of the first things we would look to for a likeness. That is why it is gone. It is also worth noting that this frontal photo and the left profile were leaked, but not the right profile. The right profile is much more important, since that is where the wound is. But instead, we get the left profile, where nothing can be seen, not even the arch of the intact eyebrow. That is also a clue. Now back to the forehead. As you can see, this forehead is very smooth. It has no wrinkles, even in the high, raking light we have here. The light is coming from below, as you can easily tell by the shadow above the upper lip and even the darker shadow above the nose. And the light is very bright, since we are looking at an autopsy table and since the highlights are very white. And yet we see no wrinkles at all on the forehead. This should appear doubly odd since corpses are not famous for taking on water. As everyone knows, corpses dry out. Wrinkles should be expected to increase, not decrease. Yes, corpses do some strange things and bloating may occur in other parts of the body, but there would be no water retained in the head, especially a head lacking a brain. To continue with that logic, study the eyes. Don't you think it peculiar they are open? This was many hours after death, remember. The corpse had been transported a long distance between cities. Apparently, we are supposed to believe that the eyes had never been closed, and yet they are still watery? How can that be? Your eyes will dry out if you don't blink every 10 seconds and you are alive. But why are we supposed to believe this corpse had its eyes open for many hours and that its eyes are somehow miraculously full of liquid? Again, this is supposed to be a corpse with a head with no brain and no blood. Both have been blown out by a high-powered rifle, we are told. So there should be nothing in that skull to keep the eyes moist. They should have shriveled up. Not only is that guy not Kennedy, he isn't even dead. Before we move on, compare the first one there to the corpse. Go to the left eyebrow, you're right. See how the picture of the living Kennedy, that eyebrow is gone on the outside? This happens to some guys in their 40s. The eyebrows start to shed. Well, compare that to the corpse. Study the left eyebrow in the second photo to the side, including the inset enlargement. There is clearly an intact eyebrow, even to the outside of the eye. The hair is dark, and the line continues far past the middle of the eye. no match. But let's continue. Some have claimed that the wax man had already arrived, preparing the corpse for the coffin, but this is absurd. Yes, mortician's wax is used for the purpose of filling wrinkles, but it is not used on the autopsy table. We are about a day early for that. These photos are supposed to be leaked from the autopsy, not from the embalming and coffin prep. In these photos, we should see Jack's defining brow wrinkles, but we do not. Others will say that the bright light is drowning out the wrinkles, but this is false. Bright lights make wrinkles worse, not better. Do you look younger in bright morning or in low evening light? You look younger in low light, and everyone knows that. To make someone who is not young look younger in a photo, you shoot in low light and make sure it is not raking. Here we have raking light that is very bright. The wrinkles should be worse. I guarantee you that if you look worse in the morning, and you will look even worse when you are dead. Getting shot in the head will not make you look younger, and I don't recommend it as a beauty treatment. And yet this corpse looks years younger than Kennedy. Remember that Kennedy, although famous as being the youngest president, was 46 in 1963. In the middle photograph above, he was 42. But he already had deep brow wrinkles. The first photo was taken in 1963, and you can see that he has gained some weight. He looks all of 46, slightly bloated, thinning and drying lips, and spots beginning to appear on his face. Take note especially of the prominent spot on his left cheek, and the smaller one on his upper right lip. We can see the spot on his lip in all three photos. It is probably a mole. And yet we don't see them at all in the Bethesda photos. The same is true of the crow's feet and all other signs of age on his face. We see some very faint lines at the edge of the eye in the Bethesda photo, but these look more like ridges of a man in his early 30s, not his late 40s. Again, the photos do not match Kennedy. While we are studying these three photos, we can sharpen our eyes by practicing on other details. We can see that Jack got a nose job and an ear tuck sometime between the second and third photos. The bridge of his nose is much thinner and sharper in the older photos, and the ear tuck is clear to anyone who looks closely. But let us move on. Another thing to look at is the folds under the eyes. We cannot see the folds over the eyes in the corpse photos, which are highly distinctive, especially with Kennedy, but we work with what we have. When Morningstar was comparing Kennedy and Tippett, one of the first things I noticed was that Kennedy had much larger folds under the eyes. Tippett has no underfold at all. He is smooth and has only the beginnings of circles. But Kennedy has very pronounced folds, folds that he had since he was younger. The corpse has a pronounced shadow from the cheekbone, but no folds under the eyes at all. With this raking light, the folds should have been accentuated, but instead they are gone. There is no medical way to account for this, except by remembering this isn't Kennedy. The next thing to look at is the teeth. We can see Tippett's teeth clearly in his death photo, and these corpses' teeth are not those of Tippett. Just as a starter, Tippett is missing his first bicuspid on the right side, and the Bethesda corpse is not. All the visible teeth are different too. But what of Kennedy? As you can see from this photo, all of Kennedy's incisors, 4 front teeth, are wide, while his cuspids, canines, are fairly sharp. The Bethesda corpse has smaller incisors than Kennedy, and cuspids that are almost like incisors, flat. In fact, all 8 front teeth appear to be about the same size in the Bethesda photo, which is extremely rare. The Bethesda corpse would appear to have perfected dentures or custom teeth, rather than real teeth. Had Kennedy gotten dentures or caps since this early picture of him? No! Here he is as president, smiling. You can clearly see that pointy cuspid. Another thing pushes us in the direction of false teeth, a thing I noticed the first time I saw the Bethesda photos. The corpse's upper lip is jutting out slightly, just as your lip does when you put in the false teeth over your real teeth. The corpse is lying on its back, so gravity should be pulling the lip closer to the teeth rather than farther away. Kennedy's mouth was nothing like this. Some people do have a lip like that, but Kennedy never did. I don't think this corpse does either. It appears that these very perfect teeth are false overlays. They aren't even dentures, since that would require pulling the real teeth. They are just expensive custom teeth, like they use in Hollywood. You can tell when the actors have them in, even now that they are thinner and more advanced, since the upper lip always moves out a tiny bit to make room for them. Even the tiniest change in a mouth will be noticed by those familiar with a face. In a painted portrait, the tiniest alteration in a mouth can change the entire likeness, and the same is true in real life. Custom teeth have always done this, and they still do. For visual proof, go to the Friends DVD where Ross whitens his teeth. He has false fronts over his own teeth, and this is clear immediately. His mouth looks strange as soon as he comes on screen, and yet we may assume these false teeth were the best you could buy. Friends was not short of money in 2000, and the scriptwriters would not want you to think that Ross was wearing false teeth. It would appear that those in charge of the Kennedy autopsy chose this corpse because it had a very good nose, and the general features of the head were close to Kennedy. The overall shape of the head, and especially of the jaw, is a close match. They tried to fix the teeth and the visible eyebrow, but the rest of the head was left as is. The teeth were made almost invisible. They are all the same and therefore evade notice. This was a good halfway solution, since it would require people to go to Kennedy photos to find small distinctions, and most people aren't going to do that. But the biggest problem is that this corpse is of a man at least a decade younger than Kennedy. The public saw Kennedy with such stars in its eyes, and most forget he was no longer 30 or 35. He was fairly young and still quite handsome, but he simply did not have skin like this. He never did, even when he was 30, but most people do not notice things like that. Look at the younger picture of him as a junior senator, when he really was in his early 30s. Even then you can see the main forehead line and the fairly rough complexion and the folds under the eyes. By rough complexion, I do not mean that he had any blemishes. I only mean that he looks like a man who had always gotten a fair amount of sun. He does not have smooth, girlish skin, as some men do have, even men in their 40s. But the Bethesda corpse does have this kind of smooth skin. It is not Kennedy. It is not even really close. For one final proof, look at the overhead shot, where we look down and can see the corpse's body. We know that the president took pretty good care of himself, but this corpse is buff by the standards of the day. The shoulders are very muscular, the pectorals do not sag, and there is no belly at all. That does not look like any 46-year-old man, but especially not Kennedy. Even a 46-year-old man who was an ex-athlete would not have skin like that. As with the face, this is the skin of a 30-year-old. And Jack simply was not that thin and buff. He was in fairly good shape, but he was not training for the 200 backstroke in the Olympics. I return to you the large photo of him from 1963. Jowls like that don't go with a flat belly. These photos would be leaked only to a very ignorant and gullible populace, by people who had no regard at all for the intelligence of those they were trying to fool. Look again. Are these two photos of the same man? Another thing that most people don't know is that Kennedy wore a back brace. He had worn one for years. In addition, he had injured his groin in 1963 and was wearing a full shoulder-to-groin brace at the time of the assassination. This not only prevented him from bending over to protect himself from Oswald's second bullet, we are told. Of course, it would have prevented him from exercise. There is no way his torso would have looked like this in November of 1963. Now let us leave Kennedy for a moment and look at Oswald. Oswald has been picked apart more than any man alive or dead, except maybe Shakespeare. And yet there is at least one piece of evidence that has so far been overlooked. When Oswald was taken from one cell to another, he was given a black sweater to wear. In the movie The Man Who Killed Kennedy, the officer interviewed is used as fuel for the alternate theory, but his statement is still not fully analyzed. He tells us that Oswald had two sweaters there and was asked which he wanted to wear. We are told that at first he wanted to wear the gray one, but then he changed his mind and wanted the black one. Notice that it is desired that we believe Oswald chose the black one, and it seems like a toss-up. It seems completely arbitrary. It could just as easily have been the gray one. Just a matter of Oswald tossing a coin in his head and choosing on a whim. If we think anything about this, which is unlikely, we think maybe he chose for some very human reason. One that had to do with his grandmother or his baby daughter or his old dog, Fido. The apparent randomness of the choice foils us from questioning it. But we should ask 4 questions. 1. Are we to believe that Oswald was arrested in the theater with a bag full of different colored sweaters and that he was allowed to keep them in his cell? 2. Or are we to believe alternately that his wife Marina showed up with a suitcase full of clothes and it was sent directly on to Oswald for his maximum comfort? 3. Or are we to assume that officers who had starved and punched Oswald into the shape we see him in on the famous footage suddenly became concerned that he might be a tad chilly and offered him his choice of garments? 4. But most importantly, we should ask why the sweater is black. We must assume that it was not Oswald's free choice, taken from his traveling wardrobe. Prisoners are not given choices like that. It was the choice of the handlers, whoever they were, Dallas Police or FBI or whoever, and it was chosen for a reason. Why black? If Oswald is wearing a light color when he is shot, people will see the blood and know he was shot. So what? People don't mind if he is shot. Most people are in the mood for a lynching, and there would be no reason to hide the blood from the public. No, the whole point of having him shot on camera is to prove he was really shot. Those in charge of the events that day went to a great deal of trouble to be sure he was shot on camera. From moving him when he did not need to be moved, to doing it during the day and doing it in an uncontrolled way, to calling the press and inviting them in, to clearing a path so that Oswald could walk straight toward the camera, to clearing a path so that Ruby could walk right up from the front with no questions asked. But what if he was wearing a light color and shots ring out and there is no blood? People might ask questions like, where was he shot? If he was shot in the head or torso, there would be visible blood immediately and people don't die from leg wounds. Ruby would have to be an idiot to miss or hit him in the leg from 2 feet away. So obviously you want Oswald in a black sweater, not because it hides the blood, but because it hides the lack of blood. If you're going to fake a shooting and you put Oswald in a black sweater, then all you need is the sound of the shots and Oswald being pulled quickly to the floor. No one will comment on the lack of blood because, due to the black sweater, they wouldn't have seen it even if it was there. It is the perfect cover for a fake shooting. It is almost inconceivable that Oswald would be put in a black sweater and no one would comment on it for 44 years. Is it customary to see prisoners transferred in black sweaters? Have you ever seen any other prisoner transferred in a black sweater? No. It is sort of like transferring a prisoner in pumps and a floppy hat. It is simply not done. So ask yourself why the alternate theory never mentions it. Or, if they do mention, they immediately spin it in an illogical way. When the whole world wants someone's blood, you don't put them in a black sweater to hide the blood. No, you put them in a black sweater to hide the lack of blood. Another thing is very strange here, and it is a dead giveaway as well. It may have been commented on before, I don't know. Watch the film closely, and you will see that Oswald cries out and lurches forward even before the first shot is fired.
He's been shot. He's been shot.
He must have heard someone step on a bug or something. He is a good actor in other ways, but he misses his mark here by about a second. He goes umph and leans forward a bit, and then we hear the first shot, and then he gives us a big Oscar-winning grimace and a little bit louder umph. Then he is pulled to the floor. Some might say that this is because bullets travel faster than sound, but these people are fake physicists of some sort who have outsmarted themselves. Yes, if Ruby had been several hundred feet away when he shot and had shot with a 30-06, then there would be a time delay. But he was only a few feet away. There is no time delay due to sound from a few feet. Oswald was shot with a bullet, not a laser. Plus, Ruby used a snub-nose revolver, which actually has a bullet speed less than the speed of sound on the ground. But even with a bullet speed of 4,000 feet per second, at a few feet no time delay would be apparent. There is simply not enough time for a gap to evolve. Oswald could not have felt the bullet a full second before he heard the sound, or even a split second before. It takes a person some time to react, even to pain. The pain response is slightly faster than tactile response, and slightly slower than muscle reflex, since it does not have to go through the brain, but it still takes time. It is not instantaneous. It is on the order of 100 milliseconds. At the elevation of Dallas, the speed of sound would be about 1,200 feet per second. Sound traveling 20 feet, say, from gun to microphone, would take 16 milliseconds. So even if Oswald had been shot by a laser with the speed of light, he still could not have reacted before we heard the sound of the shot. The shooting of Oswald was faked. It was a movie production, and Oswald was clearly in on it. Addendum, February 2018. More indication of that was found by other researchers after I published this paper. Although I used very little of the research of others in compiling this paper originally, a small amount of good research has come out afterwards, possibly in response to my findings. A YouTube video posted by Amy Joyce in 2017 compares the still photos to the films, tracking the camera flashes. She finds flashes for the photos of Jack Beers and others, but none for the iconic Bob Jackson photo above. I will be told that he shot without a flash, but we can see that isn't true. The shadows we see are from a flash, since they are cast directly backwards. If he had been relying on the lights above, the shadows would be cast down. This means the event was run at least twice, which explains the discontinuities I find just below. Not many people have seen this photo of Oswald shooting, since it was most likely been suppressed in recent years in favor of the one above. See a problem there? How about that microphone hanging down from the rafters? Don't you think it is suspicious that this scene was pre-mic'd, since it was supposed to be unpredicted and spontaneous? Don't you think it is suspicious that two separate cameras from two separate angles just happened to capture this unpredictable event? And where is this second cameraman supposed to be? Hanging from the ceiling? Either that, or he is 12 feet tall. Also, this is supposed to be in a parking garage in the basement of Dallas Police Station. There is a white car right in front of these guys. What basement is lit like this? Look at the shadows cast by the people as well as the shadow cast by the hanging microphone. There are powerful lights set up in front of these people. They are not lit from above, as you would expect in such a place. They are lit strongly from in front, so there were powerful lights set up on this scene. This is indication it was staged. I will be told this contradicts my comments about the flash above, but it doesn't. In the films, we see that in between flashes, the shadows still chase pretty much straight back, indicating this was lit by floods from the front for the movie cameras. That still wasn't enough light for the still frame cameras, which flashed. But a parking garage would be lit dimly from above, not brightly from the front. We already know that other Oswald photos were faked. For instance, the famous photo of Oswald with his gun from Life magazine was proved to be a fake by contemporary experts. Malcolm Thompson, a 30-year veteran of forensic science laboratory in the British police force and specialist in fake photos, stated in a 1978 BBC documentary these photos were fakes. In the same documentary, the head of the Canadian Air Force Photographic Department came to the same conclusion. He could tell that immediately since his head is too big for his body. More good research has been done by Mr. McCrillen at YouTube in 2013. Since I predict that will be taken down, I will gloss over it. Louis Feldsot reported to the FBI that Crescent sold the Carcano rifle to Klein Sporting Goods in 1962. His later affidavit to the Warren Commission conflicts with that paperwork and all other surviving documentation. That rifle is listed as still being boxed in early 1963, and the box numbers were scrubbed after that, making it impossible to track the rifle. In addition, the rifles Klein's had for sale were 36-inch rifles, while the Carcano we have now is 41 inches. A microfilm the FBI took of Klein's orders in 1962 to 1963 has conveniently been lost, sort of like the original film of the moon landings. The dog ate it. Then there is the matter of the money order Oswald allegedly used to buy the rifle. How stupid are we supposed to think he is? He wouldn't pay cash to prevent this from being tracked? Anyway, the money order was never cashed by any bank, meaning Klein's probably never got paid. That's kind of curious, isn't it? If they didn't get paid, why would they deliver the rifle to Oswald? The U.S. Postal Inspector in Dallas, Harry Holmes, later testified that he found the stub of his money order, but we have to take his word for it since the stub was never physically produced. Again, the dog ate it. A National Archives employee allegedly found the money order itself in Alexandria, Virginia. I guess that's better than finding it in the men's room at Langley. But the money order should have been in Kansas City, where all Oswald's other money orders ended up. Although I suspect Mr. Krillerman is using this to lead you into some other conspiracy theory, we can use it here as you see. It is perfect evidence the entire event was hoaxed.
Let me out.